Hello and welcome to our webinar on the hidden gems in Colombia's energy sector. Thank you all very much for joining. I'm extremely excited to discuss this issue. My name is Arthur Deakin and I co-lead the energy practice here at AMI. This roundtable is brought to you by AMI and Valora Analytic, our local media partner. So in terms of what to expect, we'll start off with a brief presentation on AMI's view of the market, followed by a speech by Colombia's Minister of Energy, Diego Mesa. We will then have a panel discussion, which includes 4 esteemed experts, and then we'll conclude with an audience question and answer, Q&A. So just some quick items before we get started. The presentation will be recorded, so you'll receive that once it's finalized. If you want to ask questions at any time, there's a user panel, which has an icon labeled Q&A. You'll click on that and you'll be able to pose your questions through the chat box, okay? Our panelists or myself will either answer them in the chat itself or we'll answer it live by voice during the panel discussion. Okay, great, let's get started. So here's just our legal notice. Please read it at your discretion. And before we get started with the actual content, we wanted to show a brief video of our local media partner, Valora Analytic, who's helped us with this event. Great. Thank you, Valora, for that. So briefly, for those of you who don't know AMI, I wanted to quickly tell you guys about what we do. So in the next slide, we're a leading independent market research firm, and we're focused on several different sectors in Latin America. The way we work is we use our network of consultants in over 30 markets to collect intelligence on the grounds and provide strategic recommendations for our energy clients. So our clients include investors, both locally and foreign, operators, service and tech providers, among various other clients. Since '93, we've completed over 3,000 assignments in the region. In the next slide, in more simple terms, what we do is the following. We help our clients effectively compete in Latin America's energy sector. So that's our bread and butter. In the next slide, you'll see that some of our clients range from Shell to UPS to Visa to ATCO. So it includes a variety of different sectors within Latin America. Of course, this panel will be focused on the energy sector itself. And then lastly, before we get started, in the next slide, we'll see some of the questions we'll be answering today. So that ranges from the best opportunities in Colombia's energy sector to the major risks and challenges faced by foreign investors operating in Colombia. We'll also discuss Colombia's green hydrogen potential, which is something that's, of course, a very hot topic, as well as the financing of green energy transition and the impact of the upcoming presidential elections. Great. So before we get to the minister's speech and the panel discussion, I wanted to give a brief overview of how AMI sees the Colombian energy market. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll start with the presidential elections. So the presidential elections is something that is of great concern to all of those who operate in Colombia. At this point, it's still too early to accurately determine a winner or a likely winner, but recent elections among Colombia's neighbors in the region show that the Latin American people are rejecting the current status quo. So in Argentina, we saw the ruling Peronists lose their majority in the midterm elections. In both Chile and Peru, the center-right administrations were replaced with leftist presidents. In Brazil, who has elections in October, all signs are pointing towards the replacement of far-right Bolsonaro with far-left Lula. And then finally in Colombia, as seen in this chart here to the left, current president Ivan Duque, who's from the center right, and is actually suffering one of the highest rejection rates in the country's history, is looking like his party will be replaced by center left Gustavo Petro, who's leading the intended votes, as seen here to the left of the chart. He has 27% of the intended votes. This is, of course, just one poll, but many polls show similar results. And the general message is that there's no candidate right now who can beat him in a runoff. That's at least what the polls are showing. So if Petro does win, what does that mean for the energy sector? So he's pledged to not renew any existing coal contracts. He promised to ban all new oil and coal exploration. And he also wants to give more control to state-owned entities. This could lead to higher royalties, and it could lead to a flee in foreign investment in the Colombia's energy sector. We've seen this happen in countries like Mexico, where a populist ideology can lead to a lot of market instability and some pretty bad energy supply issues. So with that in mind, on the next slide, looking beyond the elections, I'd like to point out what I think is a big discrepancy between the non-conventional renewable energy that has been auctioned and the actual existing supply that has come online already in the country. So by the end of last year, by the end of 2021, there was nearly 3.5 gigawatts in solar and wind that had been contracted either through auctions or bilateral contracts, but only 151 megawatts were in operation. So that's only 4% of the total contracted share. And then when we look at the total installed energy capacity in the country, non-conventional renewable energy, which is solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, that represents less than 1% of the total installed capacity in the country. The government wants to get to 15% by 2023, which we personally believe it's a very ambitious goals, and it's going to depend on a variety of different factors. So first, Colombia is going to need to develop a more advanced power grid, a more advanced regulatory framework to address challenges that they currently have with the lack of connection points between generation projects and transmission lines. Also, the lack of high voltage transmission lines to carry renewable energy from remote locations to urban centers. Colombia also has to improve its local consultation process, consulta previa, as well as its environmental permitting process, which are both very slow, often delayed by political influences and bureaucratic challenges. So Colombia still has a pretty long way to go before it gets to that 15% target that it's set out for 2023. In the next slide, we'll see some of the major risks that the country still faces. So outside of solar and wind, which is what's grabbing the most attention in the sector and throughout the world in terms of energy transition, there's also several risks throughout the energy supply chain. So we applied AMI's risk analysis to 10 different risk areas. So that includes local community risk, operational risk, regulatory risks, etc. 10 most important risks that we see related to the energy sector. And what we did is evaluate the attractiveness of projects on a scale that ranges from very high risk, which is the dark red that you see here to the left, to low risk, which is the light pink that you see below that, the very high risk. So the way we broke it down, as we've seen here in these different charts, is that the riskiest assets are hydro and onshore wind generation. That's because of local community opposition, delaying important developments, and also the lack of high voltage transmission lines, as I mentioned, to carry power from remote areas to urban centers. Coal is another major energy type that's pretty risky, of course, both in terms of generation via coal and also exploration of coal. Colombia actually has one of the cleanest and highest quality coal in the world, which represents around 17% of Colombia's total exports. But with the likely victory of Gustavo Petro, coal will probably see a very aggressive decline, a ban in new exploration, and existing contracts won't be renewed. So coal, hydropower, and large-scale hydro and onshore wind are what AMI believes are the riskiest assets in Colombia's energy sector. But in terms of opportunities, there's also solar, which of course is grabbing a lot of attention, especially in the center of the country near Bogota. There's quite a lot of high quality solar radiation, and there's also developed infrastructure that makes it easier to carry the solar power generated towards the large populated urban areas. Offshore wind is also attractive because it has very high projected potential. So estimates predict around 2 times the total installed energy capacity in Colombia could be serviced by offshore wind. And it also bypasses the local community issues that are faced by onshore wind because, of course, these projects are built out in the ocean. And then lastly, during dry seasons, offshore wind usually has greater generation capacity, which is perfect to offset Colombia's large hydro dependency, which hydro accounts for almost 70% of Colombia's energy. And in seasons, very dry seasons, which is El Nino years, which is starting this summer, offshore wind could be a very good replacement for the lack of hydro generation. So I know there's a lot of information shown in this chart. So if you have any additional questions of how we got to these risk levels, please let me know. So moving on to the next slide, we see that despite the very high risk that I mentioned, there's also high internal rate of returns, IRRs, for energy projects in Colombia. So the data we gathered is based on Colombian pesos. So the returns are based on Colombian pesos, and they were gathered via AMI interviews and analysis. So solar generation still leads the way at around 14% IRR. Of course, as you guys know, this is not does not apply to every single project, every single solar project in the country. The size of the project, the type of financing that goes into it, the type of technology used, all of that influences the IRR of a project. But this is just a general number that we got from several different investors that have worked in Colombia's energy sector. So followed by solar generation is followed by natural gas generation, where power plants are compensated for just existing. So they don't have to dispatch any power, and they'll still get paid, compensated for potentially dispatching power in times of dry weather. So that's known as the cargo de confiabilidad, the reliability charge that's paid to the natural gas generation. Before we move on to that next slide, our view is that if projects are structured the right way in terms of financing, in terms of dollar-denominated PPAs with reliable off-takers such as utilities, if investors are able to obtain the right tax incentives, among, of course, other things, then investors will see very high returns for their projects in Colombia. And another point is that the energy consumption in Colombia has grown nearly 40% from 2010 to 2019. And that's expected to increase as Colombia's economy grows and its population grows. So this will transform the entire energy supply chain in the country, from power generation to the infrastructure needed to power electric vehicles. And this is going to create plenty of opportunities in Colombia. And then finally, in the next and last slide, before we get into the minister's speech, I wanted to touch upon the financing challenges that Colombia and the region as a whole still have to overcome to reach net zero targets. So what we see is that local companies have struggled to obtain the necessary funding needed for their energy developments. This gap will be mostly filled by private capital, private equity, institutional funds, asset managers, and then debt financing, which includes public equity and multilateral institutions such as the IDB. So in this chart to the left here, when compared to the amount spent between 2016 and 2020, we see that Latin America still needs a 132% increase in annual clean energy investments by 2030. So that's pretty significant. It has to go from 52 billion a year to 121 billion per year. So that's a pretty big jump. And the biggest increase is actually for end use sectors. So you may be asking, what are end use sectors? And that's EV, electric vehicle stations and EV sales, hydrogen refueling stations, retrofitting buildings so they're more energy efficient and use more electricity instead of fossil fuels. And then also transitioning industries, steel making, cement making, etc., away from thermal power and towards renewables. So is this
first
money
day that
worth,
we signed up for Monday.com?
So this money worth spending? The answer is yes. So we've seen that for every $1 spent on the energy transition, that's going to lead to around $2 and $5 in return. So pretty large return on investment. And that's mostly related to human health impacts and lesser environmental damages. So despite this, I think Latin America and Colombia in specific still face some financing challenges. And that's caused by political volatility, civil unrest, security issues such as terrorist groups, gangs, and then bad infrastructure. So when we look at Colombia's financial sector development compared to the global average, it's actually only at 40% of the average. So in other words, companies in Colombia still struggle to raise capital in its local markets. I think the silver lining, if there is one, is that Latin America's financing objectives are more realistic when compared to emerging regions. So Latin America has very high levels of FDI, foreign direct investment, and that's mostly caused by liberalized energy frameworks that support foreign investment. So this attracts long-term auctions for IPPs, independent power producers. It attracts dollarized PPAs. And overall, this attracts large amounts of private capital towards renewables and towards other energy transition projects. So that's pretty much it in terms of how AMI views the market. Thank you all for your attention. And I want to pass the word to our very special guest, the Minister of Mines and Energy, Diego Mesa. He will give a keynote speech about the sector. Thank you.
Hello and greetings to all the participants of the Hidden Gems of Colombia's Energy Sector Roundtable discussion. I would like to thank the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Americas Market Intelligence for the invitation to participate with some opening remarks. To begin, I would like to say that the energy sector will continue to be a fundamental part of the economic reactivation process in Colombia in 2022, and it will be a golden opportunity to consolidate economic recovery by developing initiatives and projects that will continue to transform our energy mix, closing social gaps and bringing well-being and better quality of life for all our citizens. The energy transition has been the central policy for our government, and it will be one of the main legacies for future generations of Colombians. We promoted and adopted a set of policies and tangible changes that have helped us accelerate the deployment of clean energy. Some examples include having designed and implemented regulatory frameworks and fiscal and tax incentives to ensure an efficient energy transformation process, providing security for investment. Resource mobilization mechanisms to guarantee a stable environment for investment and participation for the private sector and multilateral banks in renewable energy expansion projects. We carried out a successful auction program that included innovations in public policy, such as having carried out the first two-sided auction for renewable energy in the world. The first auction was held in October 2019, and we managed to allocate 9 projects between solar farms and wind farms with an installed capacity of over 1.3 gigawatts. That same year, through the reliability charge auction, for the first time in history in Colombia, projects from wind and sun were awarded firm energy in what we call cargo por confiabilidad. These 14 projects represent investments of more than 2.2 billion US dollars and the creation of more than 6,000 jobs. In 2021, in October, we also did another variable renewable energy auction. In this case, we awarded 11 solar projects with an installed capacity of almost 800 megawatts, investments of more than 870 US million dollars, and the creation of more than 4,700 jobs. As a result, Colombia has increased its participation of non-conventional or variable renewable energy sources in the generation mix, having multiplied in 2021 by more than 25 times what we had back in 2018, going from just 28 megawatts in that year to about 714 megawatts in 2021. We expect exponential growth to continue in 2022 and 2023. This year, we're going to be closing with close to 2.5 gigawatts. And between the three auctions that I mentioned before, we have awarded more than 2.8 gigawatts of installed capacity. So that means we've multiplied times 100 times. The pipeline for 2023, 2024, and 2025 has grown to over 4.5 gigawatts. Just to mention, a couple of weeks ago, we inaugurated the first wind farm in Colombia after more than 17 years when we had a pilot back in 2014 and in 2004. Also, last year, we achieved a significant milestone when we enacted the energy transition law that will continue to consolidate Colombia's energy transition policy, making our country one of the most attractive ones for foreign direct investment in variable renewable energy. This law complements other policies, such as the National Development Plan, Finance Act that we passed in 2019, and also the Climate Action Law that was sanctioned by the President late last year. Some of the additional initiatives that we have in the energy transition law to close gaps and to continue to promote equality, sustainable mobility, and more incentives for energy efficiency and variable renewable energy include better tax incentives, and also having extended these incentives to blue and green hydrogen, geothermal, smart metering infrastructure, and large-scale storage. We also have tax incentives for carbon capture and storage technologies. We were able to have a better depreciation regime. We went from 5 years straight line to 3 years, both for variable renewable energy and for new technologies. And we've also have streamlined the environmental permitting for energy generation and transmission projects. We've also promoted sustainable, innovative, clean, and friendly systems, such as energy storage. Last year, we did the first auction for large-scale batteries in Latin America, and we awarded this auction to Canadian Solar, a Canadian firm. We've also worked towards sustainable mobility, and Colombia, with its electricity mobility law, has now become the #1 country in Latin America in EV sales. In 2021, we closed with 6,418 electric vehicles sold in this 3.5-year term, and we have beaten all the records and continue to lead in Latin America. Given the energy business in Colombia is mostly privately owned, it is very important to note how strategic investors are in financing the sector. Therefore, we're here to give a clear message to support from the national government to those potential investors that would like to come to our country and to continue to promote Colombia's energy transition. We can tell you that we've done our part, and we now have a very attractive policy framework to continue to expand energy transition over the next 10 to 20 years. We invite the private sector to act in a proactive way, hand to hand with the government, with society, and increasing consumer awareness of the benefits and the reliability of energy transition solutions. Colombia is an attractive bet for companies with enormous potential in water, wind, and sun, and we're also boosting the integration of new clean energy technologies. And solar, wind, geothermal, or hydrogen projects are among the renewable energies that Colombia expects to have in its future energy mix. Here are some key facts that I would like you to consider. First, We have in the northern part of the country an average wind speed of more than 9 meters per second. That's about double the world average. Also, when we look at solar radiation, our country has about 60% high radiation than the world average. We're also a very privileged geographic location for exports of energy, such as hydrogen, in the medium to long term. We have also abundant water resources, abundant coal and natural gas reserves for low emission hydrogen production when we think about blue hydrogen. And we also have a very strong commitment in terms of climate action. Our goal is to reduce CO2 emissions by 51% in 2030 and to get to carbon neutrality in 2050. Colombia only represents about 0.6% of total greenhouse gas emissions, but we're one of the most vulnerable countries. We're in the top 20 for climate change events. All this has allowed us not only to promote energy transition, but also bet on new sources of energy, such as geothermal. We already have the first pilot in operation. We're also promoting biomass. We had the first forestry biomass plant to come into operation last year in the Department of Bichara, and this allowed that region of Colombia to become self-sufficient. We also are becoming a benchmark in the global hydrogen economy after we launched our roadmap in September last year, which defines the guidelines for the development of hydrogen by 2050. It identifies the areas of the country with the greatest potential for low emissions and zero emission hydrogen production. And we also are identifying the best sources for domestic demand between 2022 and 2030. We expect to have investment of between 2.5 and 3.5 billion US dollars by 2030. After we launched the hydrogen roadmap, we signed a commitment with 8 national and foreign companies to become part of this new economy that we're developing. These companies include Ecopetrol, our national company, Grupo de Energía Bogotá, which is participating in this panel today with its gas subsidiary, TGI, Promigas, Engie from France, Siemens Energy, and Porsche from Germany, and Daimler as well. Ecopetrol is already moving ahead with the first pilot, which will start operations in this quarter. And finally, together with international partners such as Denmark, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, Colombia is working on 2 new roadmaps for clean energy, one for offshore wind projects and another one for the implementation of geothermal and biomass projects in the very short term. It is expected that in the first quarter of 2022, the offshore wind energy roadmap will be published with the United Kingdom and the World Bank, and we expect this to open up significant potential to continue to have more clean energy in our mix. With this, I'll conclude, and I thank you very much for the invitation and for your attention, and we expect to see you all in Colombia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Mesa, for your comments. I think it's clear that the Duque administration has implemented the appropriate laws and framework to drive the adoption of low carbon technologies and to diversify the country's energy matrix. It's also clear that the country has a lot of solar and wind resources, which makes it well positioned to continue growing as we transition to a greener economy. But as I mentioned, it's not going to come without challenges. So to discuss some of these issues, I wanted to introduce our 4 esteemed panelists. First off, wanted to introduce my friend from Enel Americas, Aurelio Oliveira, who's the CFO of the company based in Santiago. Enel, as many of you know, is a multinational powerhouse in the energy sector that focuses on various different sectors, but specifically electricity and gas markets. Next is the CFO from Grupo de Energía Bogotá, Jorge Tavares. Grupo de Energía Bogotá is another leading company in the sector of electrical power and natural gas and is working on several exciting initiatives such as hydrogen. Next is Pablo Barcena, Head of Corporate Strategy at Ecopetrol. For those of you who operate in Colombia, everyone knows who Ecopetrol is, the state-owned oil and gas company that's also transitioning into new types of technologies and really driving their business forward to adapt to this green energy transition. And then lastly, David Chelich from the TMX Group, which is a Toronto-based stock exchange, which has actually been the first international exchange to establish a local focus, local foot on the ground presence in Latin America. And one of their top priorities is the energy sector. So what they do is help companies access capital on their different stock exchanges. Thank you all for joining me. I know we only have 30 minutes left, but if there are questions that come from the audience after the 30 minutes are up, we'll be happy to answer those as much as we can. And if we can't get to any of your answers, I'll share the panelists' emails if you want to reach out to them individually. Okay, great. So I just want to start off with a more of a broad question focused on the opportunities in the Colombian energy sector. The panel is going to be an informal panel, so I want everyone to jump in as we go along. But maybe everyone can give their 1 or 2 minute insight into this question, starting with Aurelio. What do you think are the major opportunities in Colombia's energy sector? And I'm talking about the obvious opportunities, but also the ones that are not so apparent that I think investors would be interested in to hear about as well.
Hi, Arthur. Thank you so much for the invitation. And a special salute to my panelist colleagues, Jorge, our partner from Grupo de Energia de Bogotá, Pablo from Ecopetrol, and David from VMX. Arthur, it's an important question. Latin America is a focus, important focus for our group, and especially Colombia, right? Just to give you some figures, we have a 9 billion plan of capex for the next years, considering infrastructures and networks. I mean, energy distribution, and also increasing the renewable capacity of the region, of which 20% of these figures is related to Colombia. I mean, for us, we see a very good job that is being done by Minister Mesa during the former years, and a big shift in Colombia through renewables capacity. So our focus in the region is, first of all, to support and to push for renewables due to the great conditions in the country for non-conventional renewable capacity. There's a huge space for solar and wind, also batteries. I mean, compared to Brazil, which is the biggest investment country that we focus in the region. Of course, Brazil started before with the subsidies and so on. Brazil has today a 12 or 13% of the matrix, and Colombia, as we see, more or less 1 or 2%. I mean, lots of space to grow. And we believe that things that we are seeing now in Colombia, that let's say 5 years before we never seen, like PPAs and auctions, renewables auctions. I mean, it's a very good environment in a country that, if I may anticipate, we are very confident in terms of regulation. Colombia has one of the best regulations in the region. So I mean, that's a country that we trust in the institutions, the regulation, and especially in the increase of the renewables capacity. Other points that comment also by the minister that we are very focused is in the big cities. I mean, especially in Bogotá for automatization of the grid, electrification, especially electric mobility, massive electric mobility. We are actively participating in this segment. I mean, there's a lot of space and lots of opportunities, more opportunities than risk that we are seeing in Colombia. And of course, in a country that we see lots of innovation, lots of, focusing in still a lower average consumption, and in a good pillar of sustainability, which is key for us. There's no way to do business today without reducing inequality, with not affecting the climate. I mean, this is one of the best places to grow in Latin America, if I may say.
Thank you, Aurelio. Very, very interesting. Jorge, if you can just give a brief overview of what you're seeing in terms of opportunities. Just ask you to keep, please, the answer to around 1 or 2 minutes so that we can address other topics as well.
Sure. Thank you and for the invitation. So I think we are in the absolute right sector. So energy has so much opportunities and the opportunities to invest, but also opportunities to impact the livelihood of the citizens and the ability of the country to have industries with reliable energy. And that definitely creates a huge set of opportunities. I'll emphasize that we see energy as both a combination of electricity, which tends to have more focus and attention, and natural gas. We think that the reliability of both and coverage is an important, very important opportunity, in addition, of course, to the non-conventionals that have been mentioned by the minister and Aurelio, and which is already happening and ongoing. We, as a transmission company, in one of the businesses that we are, think that the implementation of the framework and the need to, as you pointed, to be able to construct the transmission lines and connect the electricity productions areas with the electricity demand areas is a crucial challenge that we have, but also an opportunity. The country needs to streamline the consulta previa. We believe that the government could have a bigger role early on in the process, perhaps defining which are the interested communities ahead of the starting of the projects, so that it can move much farther. And perhaps Brazil is a good example. So I think we are in the right place. Huge opportunities to impact community, and in the times of an increase and appropriately so ESG focus, everything we do has a huge benefit to both the environment and the society overall.
Great, thank you. Very, very spot on comments. Pablo, what are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. Well, as in the strategy, the recently announced strategy of Ecopetrol, we see both opportunities within the traditional business and within the energy transition. When we talk about the traditional business, we still see that there's still a huge demand for oil that is going to be stable, at least for the next 20 years, not only in the world, but also in Colombia, making it the shift towards the electrification of the demand, of the mobility. It's going to be, as the word transition said, it's going to be a transition. It's going to take time. So we definitely believe that there's still an opportunity to keep developing the resources that the country has in terms of oil and gas resources. We definitely see huge opportunities still in the exploration and development of the portfolios that we already have, the opportunities that are being out recently, and also when we think about, for example, to keep the opportunities of developing the oil and gas industry in Colombia. When we think about the gas as the energy transition fuel, we definitely believe that in order to make the transition to a lower carbon emission economy, we still need the gas as a transition. For example, the huge opportunity of renewables, the increase of capacity, installed capacity of renewables, eventually they're going to need a more stable the support given the intermittency of the production. So here's where gas also comes as a great opportunity, not only to substitute the demand of coal, but also as a support for the renewables, that the huge opportunity that renewables have in Colombia. But then when we think about the energy transition opportunities, the huge transition brings new opportunities to develop in Colombia. As you mentioned, the huge renewables potential in Colombia, that also requires a lot of challenges. For example, how to connect these renewables toward the grid, how the grid needs to start supporting the intermittency when we think about the future in terms of batteries, in terms of other type of technologies, when we think about how to decarbonize other types of consumption in terms of hydrogen opportunities, etc. So we believe that Colombia still has huge opportunities, not only when we think about the traditional energy business as today is, but also as we may start making the transition towards the future, and how the huge opportunities also come on.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone is trying to figure out how to make this transition as stable and least disruptive as possible. And I think natural gas fits that role quite well. But we see in Latin America the huge dependency on oil in terms of exports. So it doesn't seem like oil is going away anytime soon. And there still needs to be some investment in improving reserves in Colombia and finding new exploration opportunities. So it's going to be an interesting balance between the two. And David, what are your thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, so what we're seeing, what I'm seeing at the Toronto Stock Exchange, so from a renewable energy or clean energy perspective, we're seeing more startups in the pure renewable energy space, such as wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, carbon capture, storage, and sequestration space, and also cleaner fuel manufacturers, such as biofuels and synthetic fuels, such as say natural gas to synthetic diesel. We're also noticing and seeing utility companies and independent power production companies. They're also transitioning to lower greenhouse gas and CO2 business models in order to attract capital under growing global ESG investment initiatives. And the transition to cleaner forms of energy, it is well underway and gaining momentum. With respect to the pure play renewable energy sector, like I mentioned, so power companies that are solely involved in wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, we're seeing the continuation of strong industry fundamentals that's driving this global growth and this continued investor demand as the world transitions to cleaner, greener forms of energy. And just having seen some consultant reports and industry-wide reports, we've all read the same reports. Global energy demand is forecasted to grow by say 20% by 2040. It's going to require say $25 trillion US of cumulative investment is going to be required in new energy supply to meet this demand by 2040, and 2/3 of that is strictly earmarked for the power sector. And solar, wind, and biofuels will play a larger role in global electricity production. And from an investor demand perspective, the reason why we're seeing capital being attracted to the renewable energy sector and the investor demand continues to be strong is for basically for about 5 major reasons. So we're seeing global decarbonization providing organic growth and acquisition opportunities. Costs are competitive with traditional electricity generating methods. So the cost of renewable energy is coming down. We're seeing long-term contracts with credit-worthy off-takers, which is reducing financial risk. We're seeing a lot of these renewable energy companies, they're dividend-paying companies, and that's attractive to income-oriented investors. And institutional investors, they have to fulfill their ESG mandate and directives. So they're focusing in on those types of companies. From a Colombia perspective, what we're seing is the energy matrix in Colombia. It's dominated by hydropower, which accounts for about 70% of the power generation, and it's followed by natural gas, which accounts for about 12.5%, and then coal with about 9.5%. So there's significant scope for renewable growth, which we heard from Minister Mesa that the Duque government is establishing a comprehensive regulatory framework to incentivize the development of the sector. So what we're really excited about is, solar energy, wind, and biomass. We think offer the most potential for Colombia. And as Minister Mesa said, the government has indicated that it's expected that new projects should add, somewhere of 5 gigawatts to the national grid. And they're also, they put out their publication of the hydrogen roadmap, which is going to add to Colombia's, ambitious hydrogen renewable development. So Colombia appears to be they're very motivated to boost their electricity generation coming from renewables, and that's we're starting to see that at the TSX as we're getting inbound queries from companies that are looking to place capital not only in Latin America but specifically in Colombia.
Great, yeah. I think all those factors make a lot of sense in terms of why TSX has had a lot of success in raising capital, especially since sometimes local markets in the region aren't equipped to raise the necessary capital needed by some of these companies. And in terms of looking ahead, this is a very hot topic, as everyone that works in the industry knows. How do you guys see hydrogen development in Colombia? I'll leave this question open to whoever wants to answer it. But, from our view, it still seems sort of a far off objective. Perhaps blue hydrogen, which is generation via fossil fuels using carbon capture, is what's realistic in the next few years. But green hydrogen, due to its high cost and high water usage, is probably not a feasible reality until after 2030. What are your thoughts on this? I know Ecopetrol, I know Enel, I know Grupo Energía Bogotá have all done projects involving hydrogen and are piloting projects, and TSX has raised money for hydrogen. So I'll leave this open to whoever wants to jump in, but what are your views in terms of hydrogen in Colombia?
Well, I can answer it in the short term, probably Jorge and Aurelio can jump a little bit in the long term. For the short term, within Ecopetrol, we are almost 100% of the consumption of hydrogen in Colombia right now for the operations in our refineries. So we see the opportunity of hydrogen, either blue or green, both as a requirement to reduce our carbon footprint, because right now what we produce is gray hydrogen, that is the reformation of natural gas into hydrogen, and the byproduct is CO2. So what we believe that in the short term, depending on location, of course, we believe that blue hydrogen would be potentially easier to implement, for example, in our Barranca Bermeja refinery, because we have close by the fields where we potentially could inject the CO2 and make this as to reduce the carbon footprint. For the long term, we definitely see that the technology for green hydrogen production is gonna be in the money to compete with potentially the blue hydrogen. And we definitely see this as the opportunity to finish making the switch for our consumption and starting to kick off the opportunity of the business for green hydrogen to sell it to third parties as either energy consumption for some difficult to decarbonize operations, industrial operations, and potentially for mobility, definitely. So it's still going to be a transition. It's still dependent on the costs, both for the blue hydrogen, for the capture, for the CO2 capture, and the green hydrogen, for the electrolyzer, and also the renewables required for the production. But we will be putting on stream our first pilot of green hydrogen in March in Cartagena to start working around this, how to actually catch this problem and bring it as soon as possible.
Great.
If I may jump, Arthur,
Mm-hmm.
just I agree with Pablo with this transition phase, right? Of course, in the in the short term, it's not feasible. Not, it's very expensive to have green hydrogen, but we are estimating in the next at least 6 to 7 or 6 years, probably it will. And it's important to have this planning and to have a very good transition to this model, not to have stranded assets in the future. I mean, in our group, for example, Enel has a commitment to by 2040 no carbon emissions for in our assets. So, I mean, in Latin America, we have a different situation, of course, in Colombia. And gas is important, of course, for this transition. But we need to plan this transition in a very well way, in a good way, in order to have a green hydrogen and green renewables, non-conventional in the following years. One thing that I didn't mention, but I would like to add, is that we have a very good opportunity developing the interconnection between Colombia and Panama. I think this could also, the localization, the geography of Colombia gives us many possibilities also to develop Colombia as a hub in this transition, and also why not in the hydrogen development.
I would concur with all of those comments. So in terms of developing the hydrogen market, Colombia presents really two strategic advantages. I mean, you have the high availability of, renewable energy sources to produce the green hydrogen in areas like Guarira. And the cost of renewable electricity is tumbling. But as the panelists have mentioned, green hydrogen it could be cost competitive, probably around, say, 2027, more certainly around 2030. So it's a longer term process. With regards to strategic or geographic location, Colombia is the link between Central America and South America. I mean, they boast a transportation, distribution, and trade network with 5 other countries. So it's located between 2 oceans, which positions the country in an optimal location for maritime trade and exports. And furthermore, with regards to carbon capture and the Colombia's oil reserves and natural gas and coal available for the production of blue hydrogen, carbon capture usage and storage it will be used to mitigate associated emissions. So in the short term, yes, I think blue hydrogen will prevail while Colombia works to transition to more green hydrogen.
Great. Jorge, any thoughts before we move on?
Just to complement the 2 things in terms of strategic advantages of Colombia, we also have the pipeline, the system to bring eventually green hydrogen from the north, from Guajira to the consumption center. So having the infrastructure in place and able to move some of the hydrogen is an advantage. And I think that the other key point for us is to how to play into the global innovation system and how to identify who is given so much investment that is being deployed to develop the technology is being fast adopters. So identifying who has an advanced technology and bring it to Colombia. We do not have the scale to actually develop ourselves, but how to play in the global innovation system becomes critical to perhaps accelerate a few years taking advantage of the green hydrogen in Colombia.
Yeah, it's a good point. The infrastructure used for gas could definitely be used to a large extent for the transportation of hydrogen. It's just figuring out the feasibility behind it and creating the cost, in the sense that lowering the cost to make it feasible for industries and transportation. We have a lot of questions from the audience, so we'll move towards those. Some panelists might not be able to join to stay after 1:30, but those of you that can, I ask you to kindly stay so we can address some of these questions. One question came from Julio Cesar Moreira. Thank you for your question. He says, it's great seeing that Ecopetrol is seeing room for oil demand growth in the future. Can Colombia's natural gas resources be sufficient to meet energy future demand forecast? And of course, another question is, will LNG come into play? We know that LNG terminals are being proposed in Buenaventura. What's the role of LNG in Colombia? Pablo, we can start with you, and if anyone wants to jump in after that, feel free.
Yes. Well, I would try to answer the question in two phases. The first one, we definitely have the potential of the resources to supply the demand of gas that we are projecting right now, and we have a lot of resources in the offshore that we are trying to develop it in a JV with Shell. We definitely have huge potential in exploration in the foothills that potentially can bring a lot of gas opportunities to the system. But we definitely see an opportunity also in terms of timing in developing a much better and much robust gas demand in Colombia. And for that timing, definitely the LNG, or as we are right now exploring micro LNG, could play a huge factor to help develop the gas demand in Colombia, to ensure the availability of gas for that growing demand that we can actually develop. And meanwhile, the upstream projects can be online. So we see that Colombia has the potential, Colombia has the resources, but definitely LNG, thinking about as micro LNG or other type of LNG opportunities, bringing LNG from the US, for example, could help to develop a much better gas project, but not necessarily as a huge potential investment, because at the end of the day, we have the resources in Colombia, and potentially it's more like an optionality to bring on stream more volumes to ensure the supply in the short term.
Yeah, it's a good point. Not many people mention micro LNG, but it has a very important role to play in this energy transition as well. Jorge, do you want to comment on this as well?
Yeah, so I believe energy transition is just not moving to the next room and turning off the electrical light. It requires a lot of time, a lot of investment, and natural gas has two important benefits in the short term. So it's still there is still a lot of space to replace a more polluting source of energy. And a current crisis that is perhaps not talked so much about is the quality of air in big cities. So applying natural gas technology to transportation in cities has a very significant impact on the quality of life and the health of the citizens of those cities. So we believe that, and we have run in-depth analysis of how long the transition could be and how much gas will be needed. And our estimates point to 15 to 20 years of natural gas needs still in Colombia. And for that, given the uncertainties and the complexities of developing our own resources, which we believe is the right way to go, I think connectivity to international world markets makes sense. And that points to reinforcing the importing infrastructure so Colombia could have a reliable source of energy, among other things, to replace the backup for thermal plants that in many cases are backup or actually burn fuel oil, which is much more polluting. So two important opportunities for natural gas in air quality and also in replacing more polluting energy sources.
David or Aurelio? Yep.
Yeah. So Arthur, what I'd like to bring to the viewers this morning. So in 2021, on the TSX and the TSX Venture Exchange, we completed over 2,500 financings and raised around $57 billion of equity capital. We're ranked number 3 amongst all our global peers for international listings. And it should be noted that 7% of TSX and TSX Venture Exchange international listings actually come from Latin America. and if you break down the energy companies that are listed on our exchange, we actually have 203 energy companies, 137 of which are oil and gas or E&P companies. And of that, there's currently 18 TSX and TSXV listed oil and gas companies operating in Latin America, 9 specifically operating in Colombia. So we as an exchange, we're intimately involved in bringing, issuers, oil and gas issuers and capital to Colombia, especially those that are focused on the natural gas transition as a segue as society moves to cleaner, more renewable energy fuels. So I just wanted to make that abundantly clear to your viewers.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think a lot of companies in Latin America are unsure where to raise capital, and I think depending on the Toronto Stock Exchange is a very good opportunity for new capital. Aurelio, do you want to comment on this question before we move on? If not, we can move to the next topic.
No, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. No problem.
Okay, great. So another question from the audience is, what do you guys think will happen with coal or coal-related operations if Gustavo Petro gets elected? And we can include oil exploration in this question as well. Do you think they will cease to exist in a couple of years? Will it be a more gradual transition? Of course, it's a tough balance because Colombia depends highly on hydrocarbon exports. So, and lots of jobs, lots of revenue comes from that. How do you guys see these operations if Gustavo Petro gets elected?
It's more than speculating about elections. I think just going back to the basics and the economic benefits of natural resources bring to the country. It is the numbers speak by themselves, and the social impact and the well-being of the citizens that those revenues to the country provide are critical, absolutely critical given its size. So any decision will need to take into balance eventually leaving resources on the ground for a country that is not rich and has not yet developed an exporting base, an industrial exporting base. So it's a huge challenge, and I guess the key aspect to keep in mind is how a transition could be done if it is to happen in the less painful way for the public finances, which translate to well-being of the citizens and the social program that the government needs to fund.
Yeah, and I want to complement also that there's still going to be a demand, not only locally but also globally on oil and gas, and we have the resources. And as Jorge commented, those are resources that end up as in the communities through not only taxes but also royalties, through many different ways. Also investment, local investment in terms of to develop the fields, the oil and gas fields. It requires a lot of investment regarding infrastructure that stays in the communities. So I would say that the global demand still going to be there, still is going to be a demand for oil. And we definitely believe that we can have a competitive industry that can keep competing in these global markets, putting the oil in the global market and ensuring that those that the value that the industry is creating still fuels the engine of the Colombian economy and the local economies of the communities.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not easy to transition away from such an important source of revenue and power generation as well. So yeah, go ahead, David.
Oh, sorry, Arthur. So what I was going to say is, look, let's not forget, 2021 and 2022. Industry fundamentals continue to improve for the oil and gas industry, and this was evidenced by just companies even on our exchange, E&P companies on our exchange, we had a 75% year-over-year increase in our S&P TSX Capped Energy Index. So, what we're seeing is oil demand is forecast to reach, pre-COVID levels by mid-2020 and to grow past that for several years. The global super majors, they're forecast to continue to underinvest their capex to replenish their production and reserves due to, the growing ESG pressures. And, there's forecasts out there that OPEC's spare capacity looks to max out within the next, 12 to 18 months. So we're seeing, and we're also now seeing an increase in global COVID vaccination rates, and the world is moving from pandemic to endemic, and this is going to just increase travel demand over the next 6 to 12 months, and that's going to also increase demand for oil. So what we're seeing is this inability to bring on adequate supply to meet this increasing global demand, and we're seeing it right now in the spike in oil and gas prices, and a dramatic spike at that. And many analysts are calling for a multi-year super cycle to reach in excess of $100 a barrel. So a lot of the E&P companies in Colombia right now are generating a tremendous amount of cash flow, and from an investor's perspective, this is a good thing, and they're also seen as a hedge against inflation. So just wanted to make that abundantly clear.
Yep, that's true. Very, very true. There's a discrepancy between supply and demand that's causing, as we see oil prices to go up quite significantly. One question I have is in terms of financing this green energy transition, or just financing greater energy supply in general. Maybe this is a question for you, David, where's this capital coming from? We've seen that there's still large gaps between the amount that's needed to be invested and the amount that's currently being invested. Where's this capital going to come from? And, from the utilities perspective, from Enel, from Grupo Energía Bogotá, and even from Ecopetrol, where does your capital come from?
So from an oil and gas, so I'll make my comments specifically to the oil and gas industry. From an oil and gas industry, what we're seeing, as I mentioned, we're seeing a tremendous amount of free cash flow being generated based on current commodity prices. And we're also seeing the E&P companies' ability to raise capital on the equity markets extremely challenged. So most E&P companies are taking a very conservative approach to their business model, and they're basically living within their cash flows. And that's what the market is dictating towards them. They're saying, look, we want the cash from operations to go to share buybacks, increase dividends, pay dividends if you're not paying dividends, pay down debt, and any additional cash, going to say maintenance capex. So right now, we're starting to see the equity markets coming back a little bit to financing oil and gas companies, but for the most part, E&P companies are living within cash flow, and they don't need to tap the equity markets right now just because of how much cash flow they're generating.
Yeah, good point. We've seen record, results from companies like Exxon, Chevron, etc. So a lot of that money is going to come from internal revenues. Jorge?
Yeah, from the financing perspective, I think we're benefiting from both the environmental positive impact of electricity and even natural gas, as I mentioned, and as a utility, the reliability of the cash flow. So we're kind of a darling of the banking and financial sector, have plenty of funds available to fund either the organic capex or acquisition. So for us at this point is more identifying the investment opportunities, maintaining capital discipline, but we have seen enough determination and willingness of the banking system to fund our growth at very competitive rates and good tenures.
Arthur, if I may jump
or Aurelio?
Well, for renewable point of view, we are not seeing many options. I mean, locally, we saw an important step by the IDB in terms of credit line, but it's not so huge. But I mean, the first movement, I think it is promoting the renewables, right? To having PPAs, having the regulation, establish the regulation. I think Colombia is moving forward. Then this alternative will increase. What we use a lot is something that we started 4 years ago, which is the linked bond. Linked bond to a SDG from United Nations. In that case, from climate change. So we have a commitment to increase capacity worldwide. And with this capacity put in function, put in operation, this capacity, we have a premium reducing the costs, our financing costs, which is around 50 to 70 basis points. I mean, this is a very good incentive, but of course, this brings us to a risk in terms of effects, because it's a money that we raise outside the country, in US dollars. I mean. And then we have to swap and to protect these effects variation but even with the effects swap, it makes sense. It's a very reliable and very competitive way to grow and to increase the renewables capacity. I mean, this kind of way, I think we believe that will increase since the capacity and renewables increase in the country.
Great. Pablo, any comments?
Yes, to complement the part of the for oil and gas and how to access capital, I believe that this also connects with the requirements that the financial institutions are starting to put on terms of ESG. And I believe that although access is going to be more difficult in the future, we definitely believe that if we commit really to our ESG targets, if we tackle the carbonization and we actually are able to achieve the targets that we are imposing ourselves in the carbonization, we are still going to be able to access capital and use also this capital to support the diversification that us as oil and gas companies are trying to move. And we definitely believe also, as you said, that as David said, as how we can actually use these type of moments of high prices to live from our cash generation and to both start using this as diversification potential, but also as reinvesting it in the oil and gas industry that is still very competitive and still very profitable.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've seen returns for oil and gas in the past 10 years. I think levels around 8%, and then renewables has been lower than that. So it's still a very competitive industry and still a lot of money to be invested in the exploration and production. It's just implementing the right solutions around it to ensure that it has a lower carbon footprint. I think that's very important. So we won't be able to get to everyone's questions, but I wanted to just let everyone in the panel do a final remarks, 1 or 2 minutes, just summarizing what you see for the sector, what you see for the country. And we'll share the list of questions with all the panelists, and they'll try to get back to you individually. We'll also share the emails of the panelists in case you guys want to reach out to them individually. So if we can just start from the same order, Aurelio, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, thank you, Arthur, again for the invitation. Thank you, my colleagues, my panelists. Just a message of hope in the country, because we, as we said in the beginning, we are very positive with Colombia compared to other countries. I mean, we are passing through a very big, let's say, inequality challenge to reduce the inequality in the region. Colombia also after the pandemic. But we believe that the regulation in the country and the institutions in the country are strong, and this is the country that we definitely bet a lot. And we've been in Colombia for more than 20 years. I mean, so we passed through a very different situations, and we used to, and we are very satisfied operating in Colombia and very confident with the country.
Aurelio, Jorge, any final remarks?
Sure. The position the industry is to further improve infrastructure reliability of the service and the benefits to the environment and the society overall is huge. And the private capital has always been welcome in Colombia. So we either by ourselves or in our partnerships, the most important one being with Aurelio, we think that there will be lots of investment opportunities to further contribute to the country well-being, which is part of the company's purpose.
For sure. Thank you for that. Pablo?
Thank you very much. Well, we definitely believe that Colombia still has so much opportunities, not only for traditional business in the energy sector, but also for those transitional businesses and also the businesses that are going to come in the future, like green hydrogen and other technologies. We definitely believe that Colombia has the opportunities, has the resources, has the right regulatory framework, and so to ensure that these resources and these opportunities can be captured by many and create the opportunities for the country and the riches for the country to develop and to have a much better energy sector.
Thank you, Pablo. David?
So the Toronto Stock Exchange, so we are a highly respected, globally recognized exchange. We've got over 160 years of operational history, and we've had a very strong relationship with Colombia. We truly are a diverse market. Our TSX and our venture exchange, we're populated with a diverse issuer base, constituting total market capitalization across all sectors of about $4.3 trillion. We have in excess of 3,400 listed issuers on both our exchanges. And as I mentioned, with regards to this panel, we've got over 200 energy companies listed on both the TSX and the TSXV. As I mentioned, 137 are oil and gas or E&P, 48 are actually energy service companies, and 18 are utility and pipeline and midstream companies. And this entire energy complex has a cumulative market capitalization of about $585 billion. So we are an exchange that is focused on Latin America. We are focused in Colombia. We are in the business of assisting issuers raise capital in both the oil and gas and also renewable energy, pure play renewable energy IPPs, and also those companies that are looking to transition from say oil and gas to cleaner burning fuels as they move through the energy transition space.
Great. Thank you very much all for your time. Really appreciate the discussion. Very insightful, and thank you for your comments. I want to thank the audience for joining us. I know this went a little bit over the time frame, but thank you all for participating with us, and we'll be in touch with some answers to your additional questions and the information from the deck. Thank you all, and have a great day.